Let's implement React Suspense to handle lazy loading of a component. By using Suspense and lazy, we can defer loading a component until it's actually needed. Here's how we do it. We import Suspense and lazy from React, and then we define our lazy component to be loaded lazily. Finally, we wrap the lazy component in Suspense and provide a fallback loading indicator, so users see a message while the component is being loaded. Check out the code on the screen to see how it's all put together. Suspense works great with code splitting to improve performance. Code splitting is a technique where you break up your app into smaller chunks that can load independently, rather than loading one large bundle. Lazy loading plays a key part in this, letting you load parts of your app on demand. Let's say you're navigating to a new page in your app. Instead of loading everything up front, you can load just the needed component. Like here, we have a lazy component that only loads when it's rendered, making our app snappier and more resource efficient. You can nest Suspense components for granular loading control, allowing parts of your app to load independently. Imagine your app is a social media platform. First, the main loader, with a spinner, wraps everything. Inside, you have your navbar show up instantly because it doesn't need to wait. Then, there are separate loaders for your profile and newsfeed. The user profile might pop up first with its own loader, and as you're checking out your profile, the news feed quietly loads in the background, appearing seamlessly after it's done. Cool, right? React Suspense can handle loading errors gracefully too. Imagine you're waiting for a component to load, but suddenly something goes wrong. Instead of the app crashing, Suspense allows you to set up an error boundary component. This component catches any errors and shows a friendly message to your users, like something went wrong. So they're not left in the dark. It's like having a safety net that ensures even when things break, the user experience remains intact. Suspense's fallback properties make it simple to manage both loading states and error states within your React app. Here's how Suspense works with data fetching in React. Imagine you have a function that fetches user data, like fetch data. With Suspense, you can display a fallback, like a loading message, while waiting for the data. Check this out. You call fetch data in your component, and then Suspense holds up the rendering until that data arrives. So, instead of getting a blank page, you see loading profile. Until the profile component gets the data and renders it. Pretty smooth, right? Be careful with stateful components when using Suspense, as states can be reset. Imagine a user profile component that fetches user data based on an ID. Suspense throws a promise to fetch new data when the ID changes, and while it does, it shows a fallback loading. But since our component rethrows a promise, the state isn't preserved and resets. To keep the state, you might need to move the state management up to a parent component or use a state management library. Suspense in React is great for handling loading states, but it's got a catch. It doesn't work with data fetched using useEffect or in event handlers like onClick. To use Suspense correctly, you'll want to kick off data fetching inside a Suspense boundary, using something like a resource with a read method that can throw a promise when accessing the data. Check out this code where we create a resource on button click and render a component expecting this resource as a prop within Suspense. Use transition with Suspense for better loading state control. The use transition hook helps manage loading states in React. When fetch data is called, start transition marks the update as non-urgent. You'll see a loading message until the data is fetched. Suspense then waits for data component's children to load before rendering, with its own fallback. Clicking the Fetch Data button triggers the loading indicators, providing a smooth user experience. Integrating Suspense with server-side rendering requires a different approach. When rendering on the server, we can't leave a part of the page blank while data loads like we would in the browser. Instead, server rendering must deliver a fully formed page. Here's how you might render a Suspense component on the server. Using render to string, we wrap some component in a Suspense tag with a fallback, generating the full markup which can be sent to the browser immediately. Hey there. So, imagine you've got a really cool app that loads different users and their posts, right? If you pile on a ton of those loading spinners every time something needs to fetch data, it's gonna drive folks crazy and make the app feel slow. That's why we use this nifty feature called Suspense in React. It lets us slap a loading message in place, but we do it smartly. C. By wrapping our user profile and posts in separate Suspense components, we can load them independently, reducing the wait time and those pesky excessive fallbacks. It's all about keeping the experience smooth and snappy.